请不要订阅按赞这个频道，先去订阅按赞原作者。本频道只担任翻译推广的角色，翻译都已经有取得作者同意咯。
Okay, welcome everyone to episode number 2 of the Science Applied series, where my goal is to borrow from the anatomy, biomechanics, and some of the exercise selection science from my Science Explained series, and package that into discrete workouts that you guys can go and apply in the gym right away. So in this episode, we're going to be covering a pull workout. We're going to be hitting mainly the back, biceps, and rear delts. And again, this is meant to be worked into a push-pull leg split, which would look something like this. So without further ado, let's dig right into today's workout. So we're going to be kicking things off with 2 sets of 15 to 20 light reps on the one-arm lat pull-in. And regular viewers will have probably seen me do these before. And the basic rationale here is to sort of pre-activate the lats. And I think I should qualify that this isn't a term you'll see much in the scientific literature, but it is based on scientifically sound principles, and most of the research on this has actually focused on the glutes, where in 2016, Fisher and colleagues found that doing glute pre-activation drills had activation carryover to heavier compound exercises like the hip thrust. And I think it stands to reason that these neural changes should also apply to the lats, especially since a lot of people really struggle with establishing a mind-muscle connection with them. And I think the mind-muscle connection is accumulating empirical support lately, with one study published just this month finding that using internal focus, or in other words, just thinking about using the muscle that you're trying to activate, led to greater biceps muscle thickness across an 8-week training program. And at the very least, I think doing these serves as an additional warm-up, helping to increase blood flow to the muscle, improving pumps, and potentially reducing injury. So in terms of execution here, I like to think of this movement as sort of the opposite of a lateral raise. So in a lateral raise, you'd think about raising your arm up and out to the side, something called shoulder abduction, while here you'll want to be performing pure shoulder adduction, so basically driving your elbow down and in towards your sides. And this should be happening in the mid-frontal plane, so you want to imagine driving your elbow down in the plane of motion that would evenly split your body into a front half and a back half. And you can also crunch laterally into the direction of the pull for an even stronger lat contraction, since the lats do weakly contribute to lateral spinal flexion. And again, the idea here is to avoid failure. You just want to be using lightweight with mindful, purposeful lat contractions. Okay, so to get into the actual workout proper, we're going to start the main loading with 3 sets of 6 to 8 reps on wide grip pull-ups. And while in 2013, Doma and colleagues found no significant differences in lat activation between the lat pull-down and the pull-up did come out on top for the biceps and the erector spinae. And given that we're trying to target all the pulling muscles in this workout, it stands to reason that you might get a little more bang for your buck with the pull-up, especially as a sort of main heavy movement where the goal is generating maximum tension and overload. Also, pull-down machines can vary in terms of how they're loaded from gym to gym, so if you do tend to hop around from gym to gym like I do, you might be better off going with the pull-up, which can be consistently applied from an overloading perspective as long as you have a simple bar that you can hang off of. Also, I think if we're really being honest, pull-ups are just harder, and I think there's something to be said for taking on movements with higher degrees of difficulty at times. Now, since this is meant to be a heavy compound movement, body weight may not be enough to get you sufficiently close to failure in that 6 to 8 rep range, so you can use a loading belt to add resistance as needed to get you in that target intensity zone, which should be somewhere around an RPE of 8 or 9, so leaving about 1 to 2 reps in the tank per set. And you can optionally take your final set to failure if you really want to crank things up a notch. If you're newer to pull-ups or at a heavier body weight, there's no shame in using the pull-up assisted machine to get you more in that target intensity zone. So in terms of execution, I think the main 2 things to focus on are range of motion and tempo. So the goal here is to go all the way down to where your elbows are nearly fully extended, and then pull yourself up as high as you can comfortably go. Usually that means at least clearing your eyes over the bar, and you want want to be aiming to bring your chest up to the bar, even if it doesn't actually touch it. And I should say you don't want to actually disengage at the bottom and enter a dead hang. You'll want to maintain some degree of tension and tightness at the bottom without shortchanging that bottom end of the rep. As for a tempo, you want a steady and controlled eccentric, or negative, but still controlled concentric, or positive. In a follow-up article to a 2015 systematic review and meta-analysis, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld wrote that a wide range of lifting durations, or tempos, can be used to maximize hypertrophy, but concentrics shouldn't last longer than 3 seconds, since slowing them down further may be detrimental to growth, and eccentrics should be performed so that the load is controlled against the forces of gravity, since simply letting the weight drop fails to provide sufficient muscular tension. So I think that while using a variety of tempos can make sense, for these heavy compound movements in particular, it's probably better to focus on loading them more heavily over time with a normal tempo, so say roughly a 1 second concentric and 1 second eccentric, with good control being the main criteria. Also, between sets here, I like to do a little bit of stretching for the lats. I find this just helps get them a little more loosened up and allows me to get a little bit more of a pump. And there's no reason to think that if you're only holding these stretches for, say, 5 or 6 seconds between sets, that's not going to hinder your performance on subsequent work in any way. So up next, we're doing 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps on the Meadows row, and we can think of this as our main heavy row for this workout. And this movement has really grown on me lately for a few reasons. First, because you have the arm more out to the side, the plane of motion is basically directly in line with the fiber orientation of the mid-trap fibers, meaning you should be maximizing recruitment of the mid-traps and rhomboids here as you perform scapular retraction, or squeezing your shoulder blades together. You're going to hit the rear delts pretty well too through transverse shoulder adduction, and while I haven't seen any research on the Meadows row itself, research from Lehman and colleagues showed that seated cable rows yielded greater lat activation than lat pull-downs, with more trap activation as well. And granted, seated rows are performed using a neutral grip and with shoulder extension, while Meadows rows are done with a pronated grip and horizontal shoulder adduction, but still, I think the point is that rows are really going to slam pretty much the whole back musculature, including the lats. So here I like to load using 25-pound plates, just so I can get a little extra range of motion at the bottom, and you want to stagger your stance so that you're able to row pretty much directly out to the side with a fairly flat back, meaning you're pretty bent over. At least this is how I feel my mid-traps working the best. And you can also modify the exercise to be more lat dominant by standing more side onto the bar and rowing back. So it's almost like doing a dumbbell row, but with a barbell. So depending on your area of focus, lats or traps, you can choose what way you're going to do these. Okay, so up next we're doing 3 sets of 12 to 15 reps on the OmniGrip lat pull down. So here we're going to be using 3 different grips, doing 1 set with a wide grip, 1 set with a medium grip, and then a reverse grip for the final set. And just looking at the research as a whole on this, there isn't a strong trend for favoring wider or narrower grips for optimizing lat recruitment, but there is a large degree of individual variability, meaning in practice, using a variety of grip widths makes sense. And in 2010, Lusk et al. Showed that using a supinated or underhand grip was worse for recruiting the lats, but I think a plausible explanation for this is just increased biceps involvement with the underhand grip, leaving less work for the lats to do. And this is why I think the sequencing of grip variation is important. You want to start with a wide grip when your lats are most fresh, and then move into a closer grip, allowing the biceps to do a little more work as the lats accumulate fatigue. And then for the 3rd set, you go with the reverse grip, getting the biceps even more involved. So this will basically allow you to maintain the same weight across all sets while hitting the lats from slightly different angles and ensuring you have sort of all of your bases covered. So up next, we're doing a rear delt tri-set of rope face pulls, reverse pec deck, and band pull-aparts with minimal rest between these sets, just for the sake of squeezing in a good chunk of rear delt volume in a short period of time. With the rope face pull, you really want to think of this as a high row, and this is the main multi-joint movement of this tri-set. So you want to go fairly heavy here, and maybe use your foot as support against the upright, so you don't have to worry about any balance issues when loading heavily. And your goal is going to be hitting really everything that's back there, so the rear delts, the traps, and the rhomboids. So don't be afraid to squeeze your shoulder blades together hard on every rep. Now with the reverse pec deck, you'll want to load this a little bit less less heavily and get more of a mind-muscle connection with the rear delts, as here we're trying to really isolate the rear delts. So you want to think about driving your arms out and back using your rear delts rather than trying to squeeze your shoulder blades together with the face pull. So we're trying to minimize trap involvement at this point. And when it comes to hand position, you might want to play around with both a pronated or palms down grip and a neutral grip with the palms facing each other. For what it's worth, one 2013 study found that the neutral grip was better for increasing average EMG activation. However, some subjects saw more activation with the pronated grip. And I think I'd personally fall into that camp myself, since I do find I can get a better mind-muscle connection with my palms facing down. And to complete the tri-set, we're doing band pull-aparts, and I didn't have the best band in the world for these, but really the goal is just to sort of burn out the rear delts, generate a high degree of local metabolic stress, and provide a slightly different tensile stimulus, where with the pec deck, there's pretty much consistent resistance throughout the range of motion, whereas with the band, we're getting peak tension at the top end of the range. And I personally like to externally rotate a little here as well, as the rear delts do assist with external rotation. Okay, so to just about round out the pulling muscles, we're going to be hitting 3 sets of 6 to 8 reps on the EZ bar bicep curl. And given just how much pulling volume we've already done, I wouldn't say that doing assistance biceps work is required here for biceps growth, but I would say that it's a good idea if you want to sort of optimize their progress. And since the biceps really only provide an assistance role in the other movements, they're not going to be taken to fatigue. And so I think it's important to hit them with some heavy weight here at the end. And I prefer the EZ bar just because I find it easier on my wrists, but you could also use the straight bar. And similar to the pull down, there isn't much activation difference between medium and wide grips. However, some data suggests that a very close grip could decrease biceps involvement and could put unwanted strain on your wrists. So I'd avoid that if you can. And given that the long or outer head of the biceps contributes more to shoulder abduction, using a wider grip could lead to more involvement of that outer head. So I tend to favor this in my own training. I also like to use a little bit of moderate cheating on the last few reps, as long as I can maintain eccentric control, just to ramp up the intensity a few notches with this movement. Now here you can optionally add in 2 sets of 15 to 20 reps on the incline dumbbell curl, depending on how much arms are a priority for you. But the main idea here is to actually just fatigue the biceps with higher reps and get a greater degree of stretch on the biceps by having the arm back behind the torso. You want to keep your elbows back, keep your upper back against the bench, and do both arms at once to save on time and generate fatigue in a more efficient manner. And finally, to really finish things off, we're going to be doing 3 sets of 6 to 8 reps on a below the knee rack pull. If you're going to include these on your pull day, I'd actually suggest modifying the split so that you have at least 1 day of recovery between doing these and any lower body work. So you can run it as a pull, push legs, rest, and repeat, since your lower back may not be ready for the heavy squatting or deadlifting on a leg day after doing these. But anyway, the main idea here is to get a good heavy isometric stretch on the upper traps and also involve the spinal erectors running all the way up the spinal column, keeping the spine extended and stabilized. Now, of course, here you could go with the above the knee rack pull, which I think will free up your lower back quite a bit, keep that from being a little bit too involved, and provide a little bit more of a loading stimulus on the upper traps, at least isometrically, since you will be able to load that exercise more heavily. However, I think that since we're trying to target more of the whole back musculature, I went with the below the knee rack pull on this one. And I think they'll also have a little more carryover to deadlifts from the floor, which I don't include here because I tend to classify those as more of a lower body exercise than a back exercise. And you can feel free to use straps and a belt here. In my opinion, that'll only aid in the safety of this movement and allow you to move more weight, resulting in a greater tensile stimulus overall. And contrary to popular opinion, a belt doesn't really significantly impede involvement of much of the core musculature. So in my experience, the upsides outweigh the downsides for using a belt on heavy sets of squats and deadlifts, and in this case, rack deadlifts. And again, here you want to avoid failure, so leave at least 2 to 3 reps in the tank and focus on really perfecting your technique by first pulling the tension out of the bar before lifting, meaning you don't want to just walk up and yank it off the rack, and by focusing on keeping the bar centered over your midfoot throughout the full range of motion as the chest and hips rise simultaneously. And to lock out, simply lift the chest up and that's it. Okay, so guys, that's going to wrap up episode number 2 of the Science Applied series. I hope you guys really liked it. Before we go, I just want to say that once again, I'm going to offer a discount on my back and my arm hypertrophy programs. So those are 2 pull-focused training programs that you can get on my website. And if you want to save 30% off both of those programs, you can just use the discount Science Applied 2 at checkout, which will knock down the actual price to something like 15 or 20 bucks a piece. So if you were thinking about getting these programs from me, now might be a time to grab them, show your support for the channel, and increase the amount of gains that you can make in your pull workouts in the process. Thanks again, guys, for watching. This was a highly requested video, so I hope that you guys liked it. You can stay tuned for part 3 coming next month. And until then, please leave me a like if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I will see you guys all here next time.